Policy Committee meeting for the 1st of March. The months are flying by. Here we are in the 3rd month already. I'll get Tracy to start us off with the Karakia. Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mākina kina ki uta, kia mātaratara ki tai. I hiaki ana te atakura, hi teo, hi hoka, hi hauhu, te hei mauri ora.
Thank you, Tracy. We have councillors in the chamber. We have Councillor Smith, Downard, Cookson, Graf, Hughes, Story, Dunbar, Smith, and myself. And online we have Councillor Kneebone and Councillor Nicol. Today we've got a bit of stuff in front of us. We've got a presentation from Te Waka. We have Fiona and Rosie at the end of the table. We also have 2 decisions to be made. Item 8, which is a submission on the draft Hauraki Gulf Fisheries Plan. And we also have a decision on when we move into the public excluded session. We're looking to break probably around 11 and also then a lunch break at about 12:30. Right, apologies. Do we have any apologies? Right, so we have no apologies, so we'll move on. Sorry. No, there are no apologies. Yeah. So first up, we'll move to, thank you for increasing the writing size. It's excellent. We'll move on that the agenda of the meeting of Strategy and Policy Committee dated the 1st of March as circulated be confirmed as the business for the meeting. Should the meeting sit longer than 2 hours continuously and they continue no longer than 6 hours, including adjournments. Can I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Downard, and seconded. Thank you, Councillor Smith. Are there any disclosures of interest? Oh, sorry, I did. Yeah, I always jump that. All those in favour, say aye. Opposed? Carried. Any disclosures of interest for any of the items on the agenda today? None listed. Right, we'll move on to confirmation of minutes. So call for a mover and a seconder that the agenda is circulated. Sorry. So yeah, confirmation of minutes, that's page 7 and 8 in your agenda pack. And we call it the minutes of the submission committee for the 1st of February 2023 be confirmed as a correct record. I'll move that, and seconded Councillor Hughes. All those in favour? Opposed? So carried. Second one up, which is pages 11 and 12 of your agenda. Also confirmation of submissions subcommittee meeting held on the 14th of February 2023 be confirmed as a correct record. So moved and so seconded Councillor Hughes. All those in favour? Opposed? So carried. Yeah. Right, moving on to item 6, which is page 15 of your agenda pack, and that is the Te Waka update to be presented by their Chief Executive down at the end of the table there, Fiona Carrick, and we also have with her Rosie Spragg. So I'll hand over to you. Thank you, Fiona.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to start by acknowledging that no doubt top of mind for all of us, or many of us at the moment, are the impacts of the recent weather events. Now, whilst the Waikato was not as severely impacted as some other regions in the country, specifically Hawke's Bay and Gisborne, Supporting our impacted communities across the Waikato and businesses has been quite a top priority for Te Waka recently, especially in the Coromandel, Port Waikato and Raglan. And that support has looked like genuine support in terms of reaching out, but also supporting advocacy for immigration settings and funding for businesses, and also discussions with central government. So this response mahi is in line with our annual work plan. If we can go to the second slide. And as one of the 3 food baskets in the North Island, it is very important that as a region, we recognise our responsibility, but also our opportunity to demonstrate resilience while other regions rebuild. So our activity to December,
Someone's just come online and their mic's on. Someone in the room just come online. Sounds better. Thank you, Fiona.
That's okay. Can we move to the next slide, please? So our activity to December has delivered increased investment to the region and also opportunity, specifically in the renewable energy and the education spaces. We will continue to strengthen our regional insights and data, and these outcomes provide informed regional perspective for businesses, communities, and decision makers in the region. We do that through our business sentiment survey and also our economic radar. We are, though, always keeping an eye on the future. So if we go to the next slide, please. Our areas of delivery to June are a continuation of supporting industry growth, ensuring that the economic enablers of attracting investment, affordable housing, skills and talent attraction and education, and innovation and technology are always top of mind, and that the activity is coordinated and aligned to a favourable outcome. It goes without saying that connections and partnerships across the region with iwi, businesses and local government stakeholders are vital to our success, and also the level of value that is returned to the region. Some specific areas of activity to June are on the slide, but I just wanted to build on those. We will be continuing to facilitate renewable energy opportunities across the region. We will also look to work with the regional council specifically on the shifting landscapes opportunities identified in this space, and we genuinely appreciate the opportunity to work with the regional council in this space. We will continue to monitor and understand business sentiment. It will be interesting to see this over the next 6 months, and we will provide insights and a unique regional perspective on that. We will always nurture and continue to strengthen our partnerships with Māoriverse and also with Māori businesses. We are working cross-functionally with ICA and our region's large process heat users to accelerate the decarbonisation journey. That is aligned with the intent and execution of the Giddy Fund. So that is where there is support to accelerate the decarbonisation journey for large producers. We are constantly engaged in advocating and championing projects for our region, specifically related to infrastructure, which will become increasingly topical. In the workforce development space, we are continuing to contribute to the Regional Skills Leadership Group. We are very focused on building connections between local employers, educators, rangatahi and students. And also we are committed to supporting those employers that are directly engaging with rangatahi. We're looking forward to hosting Tech Week in May. The opportunities and outcomes from that will contribute to our tech industry, specifically around talent attraction and innovation in that space. In logistics and distribution, we host a forum from senior leaders across the country for what it means for the Waikato. We're fortunate to be a part of Future Proof and to enable insights in that forum as well. For the primary sector, we're looking forward to delivering further insights and events that strengthen the link between producers and resellers. So that's some further detail of actions to June 2023. Also recently, as an economic development agency for the region, we have put out a call to action for regional organisations for how we might look more boldly and more efficiently to operate and collaborate. So there's some incredible opportunities. We have had an initial forum in February, and we'll be looking to have another one. We're also considering the opportunities around co-location for a number of community organisations. Of those of you that don't know, we have a hub at Perry House where we have Waka Housing Initiative, Waka Pacific Business Network, Waka Wellbeing Plan, and we are alongside Well Energy Trust with Te Waka. That enables shared services in terms of office support, and we're looking at the opportunities to expand that. And I will leave it there. That is the last slide.
Thank you, Fiona. So, councillors, as you'll be aware, that we have basically a 3-year funding partnership with Te Waka. It runs through till the end of June 2024. So under the terms of that agreement, Te Waka reports to strategy and policy every 6 months, and we've just had one recently, focusing on the plans for the upcoming 6-month period. And any current or anticipated issues or material changes to Waka's strategy. So it will be coming up. There'll be no doubt an application coming towards us. So along those lines and that, is there any questions from councillors for Fiona? Councillor Hughes.
I'd be interested, Fiona, if you can just give us some colour around the level of funding that you receive external to the regional council funding and what this means to your ability for survival. Have you got other revenue streams which are generated as part of your business activities, or are you totally dependent on funding from the regional council and maybe other corporates? And what the plans are for the future, assuming that this council are unable to support the current level of funding, if you have plans to replace that? Thank you.
I'll answer the question in 2 parts. Okay. In terms of our funding, we have engaged and done some research in terms of what is a sustainable funding model for an economic development agency. Our funding is provided in our annual snapshot. In terms of the Waikato Regional Council, it's around 70% of our funding. We are confident that the value we provide and the service we deliver for the region is such that we will be pursuing that funding in the future. We also receive support from local councils as well, and we do receive support from businesses as well.
Thank you. Presumably you've got a set of audited financials on your website that one can look at?
We are a limited liabilities company, and we have a trust above us, so we don't publish our financial.
So how do we get hold of the financials for the organisation?
That's in our annual report. I can come back to you with that.
Okay, so the annual report's on your website?
The annual snapshot is, yes.
Just on that, can you indicate what you have raised in terms of advocacy from government agencies last 6 months?
Yeah, sure. So the advocacy approach is never a solo performance, so it's good to have a large mix of voices. So we sit on the Regional Strategic Partnership Fund Leadership Committee for the region, alongside many others, which assesses projects and initiatives that are, in the region. It's was formerly called the Provincial Growth Fund. So I can't put a specific number on how much has been awarded across the region, but we can come back to that. But that's something that we advocate for. We also advocate for specific sub-regional priorities, so the likes of the funding from the IAF Fund for Hamilton City Council and various other projects.
And in terms of infrastructure, are you looking at roading, for example, in terms of advocacy?
Yes, absolutely. So Post our freight action plan in June last year, one of the key areas is network capacity and roading. Our freight and logistics forum is very focused on that, and we engage with senior leaders from government agencies in terms of what are our priorities and what is the value that is unlocked, because obviously a lot of our regions across the Motu are looking for significant investment in infrastructure.
I was listening to radio yesterday, and Main Freight was saying the key priorities for them are Taupo to Napier and Whangarei, and there's a danger that the Waikato gets missed out in terms of the upgrades here of roading as a result of infrastructure storms.
Yeah, and that is something that we have been speaking to with regard to our opportunity and responsibility to step up, given recent events, is we need to ensure we maintain a level of investment that increases our efficiency to distribute, being a part of the Golden Triangle.
And do you want to comment on what you have done in regard to Port Waikato or the recent flooding and processes?
Sure. So specific support around tourism for the Coromandel. Around Port Waikato, it is around the conversation around routes in and out and the impact of having alternative routes and what that does for the local community. It's very much conversations and providing the opportunities, for example, the recovery visa, what that would mean in terms of the pace of recovery for the particular communities or regions, and the specific types of skills that we need to support getting access, building roads back for all of our impacted areas. So that's the type of thing. It's response activity in the form of engagement, support, and then advocating.
So is that in the context of liaising with government departments to
Yes.
make sure they hear a Waikato voice rather than just a
Absolutely.
national one? Yeah.
Correct. And what the specific local needs are. It's imperative to our role to provide a regional perspective so that we have that share of voice.
Thank you, Councillor Dunbar-Smith. I have Councillor Nicol, online.
Thanks. Is sound coming through okay?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Awesome. Kia ora, Rosie and Fiona. Really love your work, as mentioned recently in our catch up. And I wanted to say thank you for taking the initiative with Waikato Edge, considering where the Waikato plan is at, and just your initiative to go forth while local government takes the time. And I look forward to hearing how that goes while we still sort out the next steps with that Waikato plan. And last thought was as well, you might want to have a look, in case you haven't already, item 11 in this agenda is your environment, what matters? And it's got a few questions in there from our community around attitudes to business and environment as well. So you might want to check that out just to help with your other gathering of information. But really impressed with Te Waka over the time that I've seen it evolve. And it's been great to have you two join and bring your style to it.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you, Councillor Nicol. Are there any other questions? Councillor Story.
Kia ora. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just really wanted to echo what Councillor Nicol was saying. I do appreciate, Fiona, the support you have been able to extend to me as the chair of Regional Council, particularly in terms of helping to inform my thinking about representation of that Waikato voice at a national level. I've certainly been involved in some conversations asking for what are the priorities. And obviously we have our own views as an organization, and certainly the staff have been very supportive in informing those, but it is always useful to have some additional insight that you were able to provide me given the various conversations and contexts that you have. So thank you for that.
Thanks.
Thank you, Pam. Councillor Graf.
Thanks. It just says in the 21 long-term plan, funding increased from 300,000 to 750. Why was there such an increase there? And are there other funding sources that you could approach? For example, if council said, well, look, let's go back to 300, is that going to put you out of business, or where do you go from there?
I can't speak specifically to 2021. My role at Te Waka started in July 2022. So I'd have to come back to you on that. Apologies. We would assess that perspective when we enter into long-term plan discussions post this meeting. I would be reticent to announce a response to what that means for us long-term in the here and now, because we do have a planned work plan discussion with the council, with this committee, prior to the end of July, correct me if I'm wrong, to discuss that.
I'll just get Tracy to talk a touch for that as well.
Thank you, Chair and Councillor Graf. So when we were putting the long-term plan together, Council specifically wanted to hear from Te Waka at the time. We were supporting them to the tune of 350,000. It was a focus of the previous council to look at what we could do in that regional development space. Councillors had conversations, and it was supported by all but one councillor to increase the funding from 350 to 750, so that Te Waka as an economic development entity could be more impactful and really provide that integrated oversight that councillors didn't feel at the time was being achieved, and they felt as though increased investment was required. There are substantial reports on that accompanied the funding recommendations from staff, but it was a councillor decision to increase the amount.
Thank you, Tracy. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Just some of the things that you've said strike me as conflicting. So you talked about the roads and your role up at Port Waikato and advocating. Surely that's the role of the Territorial Authority for roads in their district. I would like to understand more, and perhaps whether it's a more complex answer and that can be taken offline. But I would like to understand, and I always had this concern, that Te Waka would impact on the economic development work that goes on each TA, and how that it was supposed to be complementary as opposed to be above. So I'm not sure that I understand where you were coming from in relation to those comments about your work in Port Waikato. So whether you can answer that now or come back to me offline, or bring some information forward at another time. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm comfortable to answer now. Our work is complementary to the economic development teams across many of the territorial authorities. We do work closely with them. We engage with them. It is important to have a mix of voices from a local level, whether that be at regional or at territorial authority level. Our advocacy creates not only an echo, but also a breadth in addition to the local, the territorial authority teams. In terms of the Waikato district, I have engaged directly with Gavin and the team there with regard to the response support, and we do continue to do that. And it's not just in a response situation. We have a regular, what's called an economic development forum, to ensure there is that alignment and there isn't duplication, that there is amplification for our region, and that's critical. And it also speaks to the Waikato Edge piece about how we can work more effectively together to ensure that we are working efficiently. So that's how our relationship works. We do not see ourselves as above the territorial authority economic development teams. It is imperative to everyone's success that we work together. And we're no different to many other regions where there are economic development agencies, and there are also councils, and in fact some government agencies choose to have bespoke economic development teams as well.
Thank you. Any other questions for Fiona? No. So just like to thank you today for your report, Fiona. It is critical that the voice in the Waikato is heard. And obviously there's a greater number of regions out there really struggling at the moment. But we've been really affected by these weather events and stuff as well. So the freight and the logistics of getting around our area are becoming really critical. So yeah, the more voices we can get back to Wellington, the better. So I'd like to thank you very much for your report today, Rosie, for coming along. So I'd like to move that we receive that report of Te Waka, their 6th monthly. Seconded, thank you, Mike. Councillor Downard, all those in favour? Opposed? So moved. Thank you, ladies. Okay, our next agenda item, which is starts on page 18 of your pack, is a rundown from Tracy on our work program, what's coming up for us, what we can see of our workload.
Sorry, it's page 37.
Oh.
Wrong number in there.
Sorry, it is page 37.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. At the start of each of our traineums and the start of each of our committees, we'd like to let you know what's coming up really over the next year, if we can. This committee, you will see, spends an awful lot of time with submitting both at national level and at the local level. So a lot of those will happen when they happen, and we will reply to those through this committee, through the submission subcommittee, or through council. If we can't meet any of those times, then it will come through myself through delegated authority, but they will be few and far between, and we'll explain the ones that were signed off under delegated authority from October through until the end of January this year. So what we've got here is really an indication of what's coming up, what we can expect to focus on, the policy work in regard to the coastal plan and the freshwater plan has its genesis through this committee. Plan Change 1 similarly will be reported back to this committee when we make substantial progress. We know that we've been involved in the central government reform program that's going to continue at pace, I imagine, in the next 6 to 8 months, and then it will be who knows what happens. But what we are very aware of is a new government, be it the returning government or a new government, generally has a process of reform. So again, we will be submitting irrespective of who our government may be. As I think I mentioned at one of the business we're in workshops, or Janine may have mentioned it actually, the long-term plan. So when our long-term plan comes up, obviously it has a detailed set of financials. The non-financial matters that we must also attend to will also be coming through this committee. So things such as our significant and engagement policy, the accompanying infrastructure strategy, anything that isn't about numbers and figures, which will be going through council, those policies will travel through here. So on attachment 1 on page 41, this is a diagram that you saw a fortnight ago, just lets you know that there will be certain things along the way that will coincide with this committee. What we have on page 43 and 44, 43, are the district plan processes that are occurring throughout the region. So we have 11 territorial authorities, so the most territorial authorities of any regional council. Those territorial authorities are required by law to comply with our regional policy statement, and it's our job to ensure that occurs. So there are a raft of plan changes. You'll see there on page 43 that they are many and varied, and staff will make comment to those. There are times when we make comments to bylaws, to reserve management plans. That is really from an investment perspective. If our ICM directorate have been out and have planted a whole lot of plants, trees, done a lot of restoration work, and there is a bylaw or a reserve management plan that might impact that investment, we will submit on it. One that is a little bit weird in left field was an area down in Taupo district about 3 years ago where the council was letting alcohol be sold in that place. Now, our ICM directorate said, hey, look, that might impact the behaviour from non-responsible drinkers, might impact the substantial investment we've made there in terms of restoration plantings, things like that. We also have what will be coming through this committee, the reserve management plans, particularly in the Waikato district and some of the reserve management plans down the Waikato coast, where we have undertaken in conjunction with community significant planting programs, again, just making sure that they are respected. So that is the job of this committee. There is also many changes, the growth changes, so any growth that is occurring throughout the region, and here we're talking about urban growth, we will submit on it to make sure it complies with our regional policy statement and with central government direction. You'll hear in a few minutes from some work we're doing on the highly productive land. Now, whilst we might not like some of the national direction, we are required to ensure that both we as a regional council and our district councils comply in that regard. The other thing, and it is quite topical at the moment, is where we get urban intensification in our flood prone areas and our hazard areas. Now, we have been very vocal as a council, and we make no apology for that, definitely from our catchment management side of the business and our resilience side of the business, ensuring that houses and commercial activity and industrial activity for that matter is actually placed in the best area, and that best area isn't where it floods. Now, we know some of our territorial authorities are very challenged in terms of areas to expand. So there may be an engineering response, and that again will go through our integrated catchment guides and see if they're happy with that. So this is the committee where a lot of the submissions will come through. Later in the agenda, Lizette will take you through where we make each of those submissions, we report back to you and say, look, we were heard, we were well heard, or we were told, thanks for your submission and there was no change. Staff will also make the decision to appeal decisions of local authorities, such as we did with the Ohiniwai appeal, which took up a considerable amount of our time and effort in the last triennium. But we'll also appeal other matters such as Rotorua Lakes plan in regard to, we just didn't think their provisions were strong enough in regard to biodiversity management of some key sites. So the staff will appraise you of where we have appealed matters and why we have appealed them. Hopefully it hasn't scared you too much. There is a lot of reading. We'll also, last triennium, we also did the regional pest management plan. So that is a document that predominantly sets up the operating framework for our ICM directorate. It's an external policy, so it came through this committee, working really closely with ICM and the appointment of panel members to hear that. We had Councillor Story and Councillor Kneebone who are with us this triennium, who are part of that process. That's it. It's really just to give you a snapshot of what you've got coming ahead. I know Councillor Nicol had some comments.
I'll go to Councillor Nicol online first and then come to you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Nicol.
Well, thanks. 3 points. One was, and I'm keen to get Pamela's recollections on this as well, the Waikato progress indicators. It looks like we're seeing them about midwinter. And I think we talked quite a bit last year into triennium about bringing that forward so that it's earlier and possibly, I think we talked about more often in people's minds, but not so much advocating for them more often right now, just the earlier in the traineum was in my recollection. That would be one point. Any comment, Pamela? Do you recall? Or Tracy?
I'm digging through the archives of my brain at this moment. So was that, remind me, Tracy,
The arts work, yeah.
I'm just trying to recall what sorts of things, are you talking about the frequency that those are reported through this committee? Or are you talking about the depth of content that gets reported?
I think that you and I were talking about the frequency as well, but just as a starting point, I think we talked about bringing them in front of councillors early on, rather than later in the first year, because it really gives a good overview of the things that we're working towards in regards to wellbeing in the Waikato, and just might be helpful to new councillors to see that earlier on, in context of us doing the strategy and everything else, long-term plan discussions, etc. Tracy,
Move to
did you have
Tracy for a
recollection?
comment, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Nicol, and through the chair. So the Waikato progress indicators were last reported to council in September. They are an annual, I guess, a biannual report of a number of indicators of a scorecard of about, I'm doing a quick look, about 30 indices. What I think we could do is circulate this report to councillors so that they are aware of it. Unfortunately, the timing of the report to the committee is dependent on some of the release of the critical information. I would suggest over the next 3 weeks with the census, we may be able to have a look at that if the information comes out quicker, but the WPI is entirely dependent on the data catalogue timing.
Yeah. Thank you. That's fair enough. And obviously, we're already moving forward a bit from September to July, so that's cool. My other point was, and Tracy had just sent you a message before, and it was on page 38. There were just some comments under paragraph 13, which felt a little bit out of date about the submissions. I felt like recent submissions were more nuanced than that, and so I was just giving you the feedback that I like the recent submissions. So keep going with that narrative. They're the ones that this council's already been happy with so far. That would be cool. And the last question I had was, so obviously last time, Tracy, if you could just recount for me, I know you said it earlier on, but the parts of the long-term plan process that will come through here versus council, because I'm just mindful last time it did all come through Stratton Poll and we did have everyone at the table. This time, not everyone, just wanting to make sure that we really do have everyone across the stuff that's coming to the long-term plan, and don't have a mismatch later or when it comes to council.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll get a list of what is likely to come through this committee for you in more detail from Janine. I think what is important is, whilst it will come through this committee, there will be a series of workshops where every councillor will be expected to attend in terms of the crafting or the refreshing of some of those policies. I guess previously what council has done is put it through this committee just so that it makes it a lot more efficient. And by the time the LTP goes to council, we don't have to have the series of conversations. But I'll get that comprehensive list from Janine and her team, Councillor Nicol, so that we know what goes through this committee, so that councillors who are not on this committee will also have visibility as well.
Thanks for that. No, that makes sense. And the workshops may well be a good way to mitigate that. So, as you say, just trying to be efficient. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nicol. I'm sure we're all well aware that the long-term plan is going to be a huge part of what comes across the desks of this committee, and those members that aren't on it will definitely be interested in taking part and having their input received. So I'm sure that will work. I'll come to Councillor Smith, and I have noted I have Councillor Kneebone on the line as well. I'll come to you seconds.
Thank you. Process issue for Tracy. I noted your comments where you said you will, and as far as appeals go, bring those to the attention of the council or the committee. Can you just tell me what the process is? It seemed to infer that staff have delegated authority to make the appeals and lodge them in council's name. So do council approve those or prior approval, or do they get done and retrospectively approved, etc.? So can you just go over the process, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Through the chair, so council staff have the delegated authority to make the appeals. However, prior to making an appeal, we will always have a councillor briefing so that no councillor is surprised. And then councillors are appraised of the appeal as we go through the process. Why that is staff who have that delegated decision, it is a legal matter. It is before the court, and ultimately staff or our advisors are asked to stand up and defend that decision and the reasons why we've made that appeal under the RMA. This council's always held that it is a technical matter, and that politics, as much as possible, those conversations happen in a different realm, not within the Environment Court process. We do endeavour to, staff will have a pretty good understanding if we are looking to lodge an appeal, and we will make sure that councillors are appraised of that, but ultimately the responsibility for lodging that rests with myself. And the responsibility for how far through an appeal we will follow things through also rests with myself. And that is weighed up both on the merits of the appeal, the advice from legal counsel, and really the overall cost and time and effort to the ratepayer as part of the process we're involved in.
Thank you, Tracy. I'll go to you, Councillor Kneebone.
Oh, thanks. Sorry, just want to find the mute button. Hey, Tracy, just wanted to check, just further to Jen's question on the LTP. It's really the process part we're talking about, isn't it, in terms of the LTP, rather than any decisions, as I recall. Is that correct?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct, Councillor Kneebone. It is the process matter, and some of those parts of the jigsaw that are quite process rich, I guess, but the overall LTP and the setting of that budget is definitely a council decision.
Yeah, no, cool. No, thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Kneebone. Councillor Graf. Red's on.
That's already, is that on now?
It's on.
Look, just in regard to appeals process, before it gets to that stage, is there a process that staff use to try to engage with local authorities, et cetera, to have a change without needing to get to the appeals process?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. In any process, staff start to work with the staff of the Territorial Authority probably before anything's even been scratched out on paper. It is not the way we do business here that we always have an appeal in the back of our minds. We do an awful lot of work leading up to the development of plans. Unfortunately, once they are notified, we are in a formal process, and our only recourse is to lodge an appeal. In many instances, we will lodge an appeal and mediate fairly quickly out of that. Others where we've got a bit more strength of our conviction and we do feel as though there is something that requires attention, we will progress that. I guess the most recent example for me is the Rotorua Lakes appeal. So we appealed that district plan because there were about 20 sites that were nationally and internationally significant. We had probably 2 years of conversations, Lizette, I'm thinking, yep, 2 years of conversations even before it got to court, and we were left with one site over which we had some debate. And finally, I guess Rotorua Lake said, okay, yes, we'll sign the consent orders. So that means it didn't progress to appeal. There are other things such as Land Change 1, the Ohiniwai appeal where whilst Ohiniwai we didn't go to court, we were prepared to take that to court if need be. But it is our last resort.
Thank you, Tracy. Do we have any other questions on the overview of our workload? Oh, you're all in shock, I can tell. Thank you very much for your report, Tracy. And the next matter is to bring that report to a vote. The overview of the Strategy and Policy Committee has received today, the 1st of March. A mover. So move. Thank you, Councillor Smith, and seconded Councillor Dunbar Smith. All those in favour? Opposed? So carried. In the agenda now, we'll just jump back to apologies. We did have an apology online that was missed for Katarina Hodge, Councillor Hodge. Okay, I'll move that the apologies be accepted. And seconded, thank you, Councillor Downer. Those in favour? Opposed? So carried. The next item on our agenda is the submission to the draft Hauraki Gulf Fisheries Plan. This is a decision document for us. Basically, our submission supports the partnership between Crown and tangata whenua and the management of fisheries, acknowledges the importance of fisheries to tangata whenua, excluding recreational and commercial scallop dredging from the Hauraki Gulf and moving to an ecosystem-based management approach. So I'll move now to JP. We have down the end of the table, or I'll move to Tracy to introduce the staff for this report.
Thank you, Chair. So we have JP Silver, who is a Senior Policy Advisor. Many of you will have met JP already, having come to the Submission Subcommittee. And we have Dr. Mike Townsend, who is our team leader, Coastal and Marine and the Science team again. I think many of you will have seen Mike's face through our workshop. So over to the gentleman, and I think we have a couple of slides.
So this is page 44 onwards of your agenda.
Yeah, tēnā koutou. So as mentioned by the chair, we are here to present for you today on the Hauraki Gulf Fisheries Plan. I'll refer to it as the plan. Just to give you a little bit of context. Sorry. Can you hear me better now? All
yeah,
right.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So just to give you a little bit of context on how this plan is coming to fruition. We have Sea Change, which is a multi-stakeholder spatial plan that was developed to address issues around the Hauraki Gulf. Sea Change came to fruition in 2016. And then we have Revitalizing the Gulf. This is a key arm from Sea Change, and it's viewed from central government's response to implement Sea Change. Among other things, Revitalizing the Gulf established a package of marine conservation and fishery management actions for restoration. And one of the key actions from Revitalizing the Gulf is to prepare and develop a fisheries plan for the Hauraki Gulf. So this is all the context behind this fisheries plan. And this plan is to be approved under Section 11A of the Fisheries Act. So this is a process under the Fisheries Act. So the plan sets the long-term outcomes for the Hauraki Gulf within the next 5 years. It provides for management objectives and associated management actions, and with step and goals to achieve the proposed desired outcomes. I'll touch on the outcomes a little bit further on. The plan consists in 2 parts. So we have part A, that's pretty much an outline of the strategic framework And the context is kind of like a guidance to the plan. So it touches on the legislative context, implementation of the plan, reviews of the plan, also the hierarchy of the plan. And then we have Part B. Part B, it's the key part of the plan, and it's the part that will be approved under the Fisheries Act. So that's where you have your management objectives and actions and all the steps and goals. So this plan is proposed to be the first area-based plan in New Zealand, and it's moving towards an ecosystem-based approach. This is a holistic approach that recognizes all interactions within an ecosystem rather than considering a single species or a single issue. The ecosystem-based approach will be supported by fisheries indicators and by a monitoring framework. This will be developed with Sustainable Seas. Sustainable Seas is a national challenge run also by Fisheries New Zealand, and its focus on ecosystem-based approach and monitoring. So moving now to the outcomes, the plan sets 3 key outcomes. The first one is around healthy and functioning aquatic ecosystems that support sustainable fisheries. That fishery resources are at levels which meets the needs of treaty partners and stakeholders. And the last one, it's around having an inclusive and integrated participation in the government of fisheries. And flowing from these outcomes, we have objectives and management actions. I have put some of those for you on your report. I believe they are on page 46. And there's a summary of management actions there as well. But one of the most significant changes with the plan is the removal of bottom trawling and Danish sign fishing methods, with some exceptions for some selected areas, which they're calling it now trawl corridors. So the plan has a management action to actually establish these trawl corridors, but they haven't at this stage gave us much more on that. Sorry. So there will be a further consultation process on mid-2023, where they will set all the options for the trawling corridors. And after that, the minister will consider if these fishing methods, bottom trawling and Danish sign, will be allowed or not in the Gulf. And if so, then there will be another process, like a regulatory process, and should decide on that. So Fisheries New Zealand seeking public feedback on this draft plan, and submissions close on Friday, on the 3rd of March. I just want to highlight that this is a process under the Fisheries Act, so it doesn't really has an effect on our role or functions. So our submission was more framed around our key biodiversity responsibilities under the RMA. So we didn't provide specific comments around the actual management of fisheries because we didn't believe that's under our scope. Mike, is there anything you'd like to add?
Just before we go to Mike, I have a question online from Councillor Nebo.
Oh, I'm happy to wait till the end. I was just wanting to get in line. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, we'll move on to Mike for comments.
Well, yeah, no, I'm just happy to answer questions on any of the biological stuff.
Sorry. Would you like me to summarize the submission? I know you already spoke on it, but.
Yeah, happy to summarise and then we'll come back to questions from the councillors.
Okay. So as I said, the council submission, it's brief and supports the partnership between the Crown and Tangata Whenua in the management of fisheries and acknowledge the importance of fisheries for Tangata Whenua. It recommends appropriate resourcing for Fisheries New Zealand to implement the plan and for Tangata Whenua to participate in the development and in the implementation of the plan. Acknowledge that there are concerns among our communities regarding different tools addressing biodiversity restoration in the Hauraki Gulf, because you have revitalizing the Gulf. We now have this fisheries plan, and we also have coastal plans that also come to play. considers that scallop dredging should not be permitted within the Hauraki Gulf, given the extent of the impacts in the benthic environment and the effects on other species and the overall health of the marine ecosystems. The submission supports Fisheries New Zealand moving towards the ecosystem-based fisheries management approach, because it's a holistic approach. Recommends that the plan should provide for a better connection between fisheries management outcomes and marine biosecurity activities, and that Fisheries New Zealand should also consider the impacts of climate change throughout the whole plan. Recognize that the plan is constrained by the Fisheries Act, and therefore other agencies and stakeholders need to work towards filling any potential gaps regarding biodiversity and environmental protection in regards to restoring the health of the Hauraki Gulf. Yeah, so this is more like a reminder for them that, I mean, this is good, it's a good step moving forward, but there's a lot more that needs to be done in different spaces, and that they should communicate with regional councils, Department of Conservation, and everyone else. So yeah, that's a summary, but I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you.
I'll go to you again, Councillor Kneebone.
Thanks, Warren. So look, Tracy, not sure who to direct this question to, you or JP or Mike Kadema. I'll chuck it out there. And in the first, just to be clear, I'm no expert and I'm not a recreational fisher, but it always feels to me like catch limits are set to suit the fishing industry, commercial fishing industry, rather than a more holistic health of the marine ecosystem. So from that perspective, this seems like a really good idea to me. I guess my questions are, is this process something that was driven by central government, or was it part of the Hauraki settlement, and are we likely to see it pan out across other parts of the country? And the other big question is, how much horsepower will this have, and will the minister be the ultimate sign off on whether on what the ultimate form of this this plan actually is, or in other words, if there's a depending on who the government of the day is and where their interests lie, could this potentially be watered down as well? So how much actual, what will I think the term's total allowable catch, but excuse me, I probably got that wrong, Warren. But will this plan, for example, inform catch limits and things like that, or will the minister have the authority to push it to one side if it doesn't suit him, whoever that minister is? If those questions make sense, please.
So through you, Chair, the first question, was this driven by government? So there was the sea change process, Councillor Kneebone, you'll be aware of, that we participated in along with a bunch of other stakeholders over a 3-year period. At the end of that process, all the parties who had responsibilities, being ministers of the Crown and regional councils, and iwi, would go away and develop implementation plans. We developed an implementation plan in, I'm going to say, May 2017, and a lot of that implementation was to come through our coastal plan, and also came through our last LTP in terms of some areas of investment across the organisation. Whilst in the Science and Policy Directorate, most of the investment was in the coastal plan development. Other directorates, such as resource use, there was some investment made for an update of stormwater guidelines, particularly as they related to the coastal marine area. So we did a comprehensive implementation plan of the responsibilities that came out of sea change, as did Auckland Council. It's taken the government a number of years between the different ministries to get together and prioritise what was needed. This has come about as a result of Department of Conservation and Ministry of Primary Industries and Fisheries New Zealand all working together to pull some levers. In terms of will it be the minister, can subsequent governments water it down? Yes, they can at any stage. They can choose to change it, but they would have to go through a consultation process, as I understand. JP?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
and so will this have a bit of horsepower in terms of informing commercial catch limits and things like that?
I understand it is intended to.
Yeah,
okay.
that is the design of the process, Stu. It was recognised through sea change that the only way to be able to manage that Hauraki Gulf Marine Park was to make it a separate fisheries management area, which is what this proposes. So any catch limits and everything like that will be dealt with within that Hauraki Gulf Marine Park area. So again, and it just puts into place, I think, some steps that the minister will have to look at now, recognise the fact of the eco-based fisheries management systems that are being talked about. There's still a lot of research and baselines to be done, but it actually gives him a really good overview, and it just manages that Hauraki Gulf Marine Park area.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Thanks for your questions, Councillor Nearbone. I'll just throw one in there. I'd just like to see a little bit more emphasis on us valuing management input from stakeholders and communities. You know, we mentioned tangata whenua, but I think it's critical that we just show that we value that management from those other stakeholders and communities.
Okay.
And then just pointing out again to don't lose sight of the fact of I think we need to be involved when that trawl corridor conversation comes up. We recognise the damage that's been done by the scallop dredges, both recreational and commercial, and still being allowed to dredge through certain corridors is just, in my view, and I'm sure a number of councillors, just ridiculous. So yeah, please don't lose sight of when that consultation comes up.
Yes, for sure.
Councillor Hughes.
Yes, I'd like to just talk about the trawl corridors as well, not just for dredging, for scallops, but also for both first seining and ordinary netting. Fish congregate in school. The most lucrative part for the fishermen, the commercial fishermen, is when fish are schooling. Commercial fishermen generally, they talk about the Olympic system, and if there's insufficient fish there for them to target them economically, they'll stay home. They don't go out. The Olympic system means the best man wins, so the first person there will be targeting the fish, and they've got a rule that the others stay away. So it's all pretty well managed from their point of view, but the corridors will work provided they target the areas where the fish are not schooling, and the fish don't spawn and school in the same areas all the time, but they do tend to congregate around feeding areas and worm beds and places like that, which are targeted by recreational fishermen. And I would be suggesting that the trawl corridors should exclude those recreational, not the recreational fishing, but the feeding areas that we know fish generally congregate. The other area that I'd like to comment on is just recreational fishermen and the current abuse of the rules. I've personally seen evidence of people coming in, unloading fish, limit of 7 snapper per person. They'll come in, unload, there'll be people on the beach waiting for them, take them away and they're back straight out again. See that happen twice with the same boat when fish are really running. That should be stopped. I don't know how you do it. It just means policing it. I'm not a big fan. It should be, the citizens should be policing it. And I don't know whether that happens a lot in the Hauraki Gulf, but certainly in the Thames, which is part of the Hauraki Gulf, it's quite a prevalent activity there. I don't know whether that the plan or whether we've just got to be more diligent in reporting it.
I think, Chris, those regulations will be in the plan. It's just making sure that enforcement through MPI is actually happening. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, Mike, I know we're not submitting on trawling now, that it'll be a subsequent matter, but is there any comments, any preliminary thoughts that you've got on the trawl corridors, just to respond?
I'm sure, yeah. Maybe just to give you a little bit of an insight as to how the process has been working. So I was invited along as part of the science review panel, so not making any kind of decisions as such, but just reviewing the science and the approach. So just to reflect in that, there's a good range of representation from various folks. The fisheries guys are in there. They're kind of understanding how the modelling has been done. I guess there's a few components, and I touch on this a little bit in a biodiversity paper that's been prepared or may have got to you. So really around the information which kind of feeds into where is the best place for corridors, and that's a reflection on both the biodiversity values that are there, so some species distribution modelling, knowledge of habitats, and various values in the Gulf. In addition to understanding kind of where catch effort is and where the value to fishery is, to actually kind of look and see if there's scenarios which can help protect the biodiversity and help keep open areas where there is fishing potential, rather than just leave open areas where people do not fish. For me, that's kind of where my journey finished, because I don't go into those kind of management decisions. Within the group I was working in, there is interest at what does a corridor mean? Does that mean 1%, 2%? Does that mean 30%? What you know, how wide does a corridor, you know, and it's still a corridor, and that's really where I think you know, the interest will be, the pressure will be, and the response accordingly. We kind of mentioned in the paper, and I'll just touch on this. Generally, there's been a lot of fisheries things, and we've generally kept out of fisheries because that's Fisheries Act stuff. This is one where it does actually overlap with our responsibility around biodiversity, around habitat structure, around the state of the environment. So this is where that overlap, and I think we've dealt with it in the right way. You'll be aware of the Motiti decision and kind of biodiversity, but here we've kind of commented on that, and we've left the fact that we understand that this is ecosystem-based management for a fisheries purpose, that is pushing it on a considerable way, not just thinking about the stock and the dollar value, but actually thinking about the ecosystem. But that still is constrained about thinking about the ecosystem for fisheries, and there are other parts of the ecosystem that are, you know, useful for little critters that no one else cares about, and other parts of our biodiversity and other things that this will not consider. So there is just that reflection that we have to wait and see what it looks like, what it actually is protecting, before we decide whether we need to do something, or DOC are doing something, or other management is needed. So I think that's probably yeah, the key.
Thank you, Mike. Councillor Dunbar-Smith.
Just to clarify that the Hauraki Gulf in this context goes all the way around to basically Waihi, doesn't it? It's not just the Firth of Thames.
Yep, the full Hauraki Gulf Marine Park, yes.
That's quite a wide thing. And picking up on the objectives of the draft plan, we're supporting greater tangata whenua and regional participation in fisheries management. I wonder, picking up the point that Councillor Mayer was saying, in your submission point number 8, MPI must assure the appropriate resourcing for tangata whenua listed in the process, whether there should also be resourcing for stakeholder groups. And so that might just be an amendment to add to that.
Yeah, through you, Chair, just one comment. So in the revitalising the Gulf, the Ahu Moana kind of, I guess, strategy or approach, which is going to bring in some of that kind of bottom up and community, you know, kind of management. Compared to everything else, I think that one's a little bit kind of, we're not further back in the queue, but even just around getting the right people in the room, and so, for example, on the fisheries indicator development, making sure the iwi in the room, the right people in the room, that things are appropriately resourced, that has certainly come to light and is being managed. So I think it's just going to be a little bit of time before we see what the Ahu Moana package actually looks like. There will be a lot of cascading effects from that, but I think it is just a little bit kind of behind it, or further down in the process, but the intention is there for it to come about.
So should we be advocating for that to be moved forward, or is it just necessary it follows this timeline?
I think one of the things, Ben, is like Mike's alluding to, the nuts and bolts of that Ahu Moana concept hasn't been worked out yet. But I do pick up on your point, and same as my concerns as JP, that we have that piece in there that, you know, we value the input from our communities. That is outlined, Tracy.
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, I think it's important to recognise tangata whenua explicitly called out in the plan, but I think we can also acknowledge that, but also acknowledge that the communities and other stakeholders must also be incorporated,
Yeah.
and with associated support where necessary. With respect to Ahu Moana, I think it's stretching the bounds of the submission to jump in there, but I've taken on board, and staff have definitely noted keeping our eyes and ears open for any developments in that space, as well as any movement on the trawl corridors. We will definitely bring that back to the committee.
Thank you. Any other? Oh, yes, sorry, Councillor Nebo.
Oh, just a quick one, Chair. I just want to get clarification. I can't see the room, but in terms of absolutely endorse making sure we facilitate good community engagement. I think Ben talked about, I thought he said financially supporting advocacy groups, or I forget the exact terminology he used. I think we need to be a little bit careful there, because we don't want to end up being the arbitrator of who the appropriate advocacy groups or community groups are from a funding perspective. So absolutely support engaging with them and doing everything, you know, appropriate for us to facilitate that. But as for providing financial support for specific advocacy groups or whoever they are, I think I'd be a bit nervous about going there, if that makes sense, please.
Just to comment
Yeah,
on that,
I'll get
the wording
Councillor
is
Drummond.
MPI must ensure there's appropriate resourcing.
Did you catch that, Stu?
Sorry. Yeah. No, I did. Yeah. No, that's fine. Yeah.
That clears that up. Thank you. Any other questions, councillors, for JP or Mike? No, good as gold. So moving forward, I'd like to move that we receive the submission on the draft Hauraki Gulf Fisheries Plan dated February 2023. And the second part to that is that the committee endorses the proposed submission on the draft Hauraki Gulf Fisheries Plan, subject to amendments identified in these discussions.
And just to be clear, through the chair, those amendments will relate to incorporating increased reference to including our stakeholders and communities as well, where we've mentioned that in the submission.
Thank you, Tracy. And seconded, Councillor Downard. Those in favour? Opposed? So carried. Yes, I just get Tracy to give us a bit of a run-in.
So councillors, we now move to page 55. Actions arising from emissions reduction plan and the National Adaptation Plan. I just wanted to give an introduction, noting that this item was discussed. There's a duplicate item to that which was put up to the Climate Action Committee yesterday. Questions were raised. Hey, I hope we aren't just seeing duplicate papers. Let's ensure that we are being efficient. For those councillors who weren't there yesterday, I just made the comment at the meeting that this is placed before this committee. As this committee in its terms of reference is the committee responsible for signing off many of the submissions that will be made in accordance with the timeline that Annika will soon speak to. Those submissions will be highly informed by the conversations at the Climate Action Committee. We talked earlier about the work programme ahead of you. It was a good opportunity and a complementary paper to that work programme. It is probably the only paper that you will see that is a duplicate paper in your triennium. From what comes through from the Climate Action Committee, to the Strategy and Policy Committee, but it was really making sure that whilst this is the work program of the Climate Action Committee to inform the conversation and definitely to be across the conversation, it is the responsibility of this committee to formalise that conversation and advocate on behalf of the organisation in the region. So thanks to Chair Nicol of the Climate Action Committee, who kind of had a very quick conversation yesterday, but placed it squarely in the lap here. I just wanted to give councillors reassurance that it is not duplication, but just making sure that it landed in the right spot, and Annika will take us through the paper today. She didn't get that chance to yesterday. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tracy. Just before we get underway with Annika, Councillor Downard.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, Tracy, just to move on from that, you know, I've even heard comments from some of the councillors this morning re certain councillors not being on some committees and others, and whether they get that information. Just me personally, I just find that everyone has a responsibility, you know, when they're going into the annual plan or long-term plan, whether you're not on certain committees, to be well informed. And if you want to turn up or zoom in, I just feel as though that I don't need other councillors to say that I need more information because I'm not on a certain committee, and I don't want to create any more workload for the staff on doing that. I find that, you know, if I turn up to the workshops and like yesterday, there was 2 chairs that turned up to the Climate Change Committee that weren't on that to be informed themselves. So I think it's, you know, up to us to decide how much information we get, not other councillors asking, you know. I'm not pointing the finger at anyone, but I'm just noticed, you know, at certain times that councillors are asking that, oh, you know, someone might not be informed because they're not on that committee. Well, it's up to each of us to be informed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Downard. And yeah, we certainly get all the emails and all the packs and everything like that coming through to us. So yes, so I don't think there's an issue with not being able to be informed. It's just up to the individual. Annika, please.
Kia ora tātou. So this report, it outlines the work that we have undertaken to assess the impact of the National Adaptation Plan and the Emissions Reduction Plan, to assess what impact that will have on the Submissions and Advocacy Work Programme. I'll just take the opportunity to provide you with a really brief background on these plans. So they are requirements under the Climate Change Response Act, and the Emissions Reduction Plan was released in May last year, and it sets out how New Zealand will meet its first emissions target and budgets, and how it plans to transition to a low emissions future. So the Emissions Reduction Plan is linked to the emissions budget, and we can expect to see new plans each time a new budget period comes up. The National Adaptation Plan was released in September 2022, so a little bit later, and it sets out how the government will respond to the climate risks identified in the National Climate Change Risk Assessment. So the National Adaptation Plan also divides its actions into what are seen to be critical actions, supporting actions, and what will form part of its future work program. Now, there are a number of actions. There are what we have identified as 126 actions in the National Adaptation Plan and 289 actions in the Emissions Reduction Plan. So grouping together, you're looking at upwards of 300 actions in there. Waikato Regional Council are not the lead on these actions, nor a local government. However, and they are led by government agencies. So attached to each action, you will see a lead agency such as the Ministry for the Environment or MPI. But whilst we're not delivering these actions, we have identified that Waikato Regional Council is likely to be impacted by a number of these actions. For example, and as Tracy has already alluded to, it may be that we are submitting or making consultations on them or advocating through the actions. And in other places, you'll see some of the actions will be around reform. So there may be requirements for us to implement reforms. In brief, and to give you a high-level overview of the 126 actions outlined in the National Adaptation Plan, we identified 41 as being relevant to the Submissions and Advocacy Work Programme here. Coincidentally, and I promise it is a coincidence, of the 289 actions in the emissions reduction plan, we also identified 41 that we think will be relevant to the work program. We have, however, also noted, and you'll see it in the timeline on the third page, there are a number of actions that we have kept as a watching brief. The reason for this is because these actions in the plans are very high level. Some of them haven't been scoped out and some of them will take place in the future. We weren't able to assess what or if impact it will have, but we had an inkling there may be one, so we've kept it on our schedule to keep abreast of that issue and check in again to make sure that if there's something required from us, we are across that. So as you'll see on the screen, and I apologise, I realise it's small. There are a number of years to get across, but hopefully you can also see it in your packs. But this is the timeline. It spans across 2022 to 2028. And the blue boxes illustrate the actions that are in the National Adaptation Plan, and the grey boxes are used to illustrate those that are in the Emissions Reduction Plan. You'll also see in the bottom right-hand corner on the first page, there is a little box and it sets out the different chapters of each plan. We've put that in there because if you were to look at a certain action in the timeline, if it starts with 3, for example, it relates to chapter 3 in the particular plan. It just allows you to link up and see where to look if you were going to look that one up. I'd also just take this opportunity to highlight that the timeframes we have used reflect the timeframes in each plan. They're not our own timeframes, so we are working to when we can expect the government agencies to start implementing these actions. You will see that they aren't defined in days or months. In some cases, they span across a number of years, so we will keep a watching brief to find out when those arise. But whilst we can't anticipate exactly when they are, there were some where we could anticipate, for example, if it was a consultation, it may be that we would expect, if the action was for a legislative reform, we might expect the consultations to occur earlier in those timeframes. What this does is it gives us an idea of the future work program and what we can expect to see and how we can plan for this. Some of the key finding for the consultation and submission work is that we think there may be around 60 consultations coming out of these actions in the plans. Half of these may take place this year. Of course, each time a submission opportunity arises, as Tracy's already set out, we would need to assess whether that is something that it's within scope of the Waikato Regional Council interest to submit on, but we will make sure that we are across these actions to check in on that. Some examples I thought might be helpful to give you in terms of how it will affect our work program. I've got 3 here that I've just pulled out. So the first one, in the National Adaptation Plan, for example, the Department of Internal Affairs has an action there to improve the natural hazard information on the limb. So we are not the lead agency of that, but Regional Council were identified as a key stakeholder because the bill seeks to require regional councils to provide that natural hazard information. And that appeared in our timeline, and as you will have seen, we did make a submission on that. So that's a way we can highlight that in the timeline. Another one, for example, in the National Adaptation Plan, there's an action for MFE to implement the proposed national policy statement for Indigenous biodiversity. So again, we are not the lead action, but Regional Council will be a key stakeholder. There was a submission opportunity for this draft national policy statement. Whilst it's not out yet, we also have identified that this will inform our future work program and maybe work for our strategic biodiversity policy advisor looking at a biodiversity strategy and accord. A final example is one in the National Adaptation Plan again, where MFE are going to produce a guidance, or they've signalled for they produce a guidance on dynamic adaptive pathways, and that will help with adaptation planning. So this is a possible consultation opportunity for us when that guidance or draft guidance gets released, and a member of our team has signalled that they will be attending a workshop on this. So as you'll see, there are also some really key submissions in there. For example, you'll see one of the actions is around the resource management reform, and that formed part of the submission program. Obviously, we appreciate that in election year, things might change, timelines might change, but this gives us a high-level overview. So really to summarise, what does this tell us? We can expect to see quite a few consultations coming through in the emissions reduction and the national adaptation space. We do consider we have sufficient capacity in our advocacy role to undertake these and the expected outcomes. And the work will also assist in monitoring the delivery of the actions from central government. So to gauge any requirements and efforts from Waikato Regional Council to respond to any new roles and responsibilities from these work programs. Thank you. Take questions.
Thank you, Annika. Just before, I can't see any lights on at the moment, but Karen, I'd just like to invite you to add anything to that you may wish to, for the benefit of councillors.
Sorry, just get myself sorted with the mic. Morning, councillors, and thank you for the opportunity to comment. So working closely with the team here, we will be aligning the work programs, as Tracy noted before, so that the Climate Action Committee can dovetail into the strategy and policy direction. We are, as noted yesterday at the committee, currently reviewing the Climate Action Roadmap, and that will be incorporating the actions coming down from central government through the National Adaptation Plan and the Emissions Reduction Plan. And so that will bring in all of our work programs, probably extending beyond the submissions and policy team here. So we will bring that to you in April for a workshop, so you will see the extent of the impact. Now, we are very mindful of the direction that this is not to become an industry, and that we are to incorporate, wherever possible, climate response into our work programs, and that is indeed what we are doing. So a lot of what you see in that timeline is about how do we just change the way we're facing, so that when we are working through our actions here, that they are spliced into the work that we are already doing in biodiversity, in flood response, etc., resilience. I can't say at this stage, though, that there won't be requests for more funding or staff coming through the long-term plan. But that's the work we're doing now. Let's really understand the extent of the expectations and the obligations and bring that back to you as considered business cases over the next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Speaking order, I have Councillor Story, Councillor Nicol, and then Councillor Downard. So go, Councillor Story.
Kia ora, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanting to make sure my understanding is correct in paragraph 17, talking about the 63 possible consultation opportunities. Just so I'm clear on what we lead versus what we respond to. So when we say consultation opportunities, does that mean somebody else is undertaking a consultation process and we are responding to that, we are feeding into that, as opposed to us going out to our communities and talking to them?
Correct, and through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that is correct, and thank you for clarifying. So it is consultation opportunities that we've identified coming from government agencies on initiatives that they are presenting or reforms that they are presenting.
And each of those consultation opportunities, does each of those result in a submission, or what? Because I'm just noting 63, around half of these in this calendar year, and we are in third month, aren't we? Right.
Through you, Mr. Chair, like all submissions, I mean, what comes through this committee or through council is a segment of all possible things we could submit on. So the staff will triage effectively those opportunities. It's quite likely that if we start to see we have to participate in all of them, we will have a pro forma submission at the front with particular matters of specificity behind it, particularly in regard to our climate action response. So hopefully we will not be submitting on all 63, but we will look at those opportunities, we'll triage them. If there is something that we must participate, that our climate action roadmap has said is important to this council, then it will definitely come.
All right. I appreciate what you said about that you do feel you do have the resources already on board to respond to this. That's great to hear, because that was my question is are we geared up for that that level of interaction? But thank you very much for that. Thank you for the paper.
Thank you, Councillor Story. It was one of the things I was going to raise too, and in the next item on the agenda as well. Councillor Nicholas no longer has any questions, so Councillor Downard.
Yeah, I suppose mine comes to that funding being government-led, and Karen mentioned that, you know, in the next long-term plan that there might be extra staff and needed, and that's the big concern. How big is this climate change going to get that affects us? And I realise, you know, over the last year, see the weather changes and stuff like that needs to be done, but it's the cost that I'm real scared of, to get that evidence base to make good decisions. You know, do you foresee any funding coming from government, or is it normally a government-led thing that nothing comes down from the top and we're left with, you know, the bill and the responsibility?
Through you, Mr. Chair, costs, as Karen said, we will try to do as much within business as usual, because we need to change our business as usual. We need to augment that, so we are thinking in a different way, and it is core business. It's not an oh, and now we must tack this on. It's actually a change in the way we do business, but there will be costs. In terms of the long-term plan, they will come through first strategic outline cases and then business cases to council, stacked up against the other priorities that are just as important, and you have staff just as passionate that will bring those to you, and council will ultimately make the decision. But critically, we will be identifying what those statutory requirements are and what our must-dos. And I know the previous conversation the council has had is really wanting to understand what the statutory requirements are and what are nice-to-dos on top of that. I suspect some of the statutory requirements will come with a price tag, and we need to be very clear to our ratepayers what the cost is and what the value is that is returned from that. But we will be travelling through that process in the next 6 to 8 months. Karen and the climate action team across the organisation is very aware and very attuned into what opportunities there are from central government funding. But of course, we are one of many councils who are all aware and attuned to central government funding.
Thank you, Tracy. I have Councillor Nicholl back online.
Yeah, thanks. I just thought I'd respond as well to Councillor Downard's comments, just to give, I suppose, my impression is that there's a strong narrative out there that there's a huge expectation by local government and others that central government will foot a lot of the bill for some things. So they already do have the recycling of the ETS money, which is the climate emission reduction funding, which has been rolling out to various parts of our community. And other than that, for example, in public transport and the way that that's funded with usually 51%, there's an expectation that the Waka Kotahi funding mix would change over time to provide that. So if government are leading it, they do have that responsibility to follow it up. And on adaptation, as you were there yesterday when we were speaking about it, that's why we're so keen on the Climate Adaptation Act, to let us know what kind of strategies and ratios will be applied for addressing the issues that have come about by decisions in the past of where we've built and other things. So adaptation should be covered, at least knowing how to fund through that act, and then we can have that conversation. But yeah, there should really be things coming with it. Otherwise, it's not going to happen, right? Because we know our situation here in local government. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Nicholl. Councillor Hughes.
Well, first, I'd just like to point out for people here who don't seem to understand that central government funding is actually taxpayers' money. There's no magic pool of money which is being printed in Wellington which is going to pay these bills. It's our money which is being wasted. So that's the first point I'd like to make. Second point is climate is changing. There's no question about that. Nobody can dispute the fact. It's changed since the beginning of time, and it'll continue to change. We can't do anything about it, but we can adapt, and that's what I'm only happy, absolutely happy to support adaptation. But to think that we can change it, we might as well just go and all walk into the sea. There won't be a Noah's Ark there for us, but yeah. So be aware that that's my stance. The science, I have not been able to be convinced by reading that we are responsible, that human beings on this earth are responsible for it. And particularly in New Zealand, we report 0.1%, 0.017 of 1% of the measured carbon emissions in the world. I don't know why we waste so much time on the subject, to be quite honest.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Councillor, did you want to reply?
Yeah. Could I respond?
Sorry, Councillor Nicol, I have Councillor Dunbar-Smith up first.
Apology.
Firstly, in response to Councillor Hughes, I pointed out yesterday that there is a $12 billion bill that we are due to fund by 2030 for buying offsets from other countries if we don't reduce, and that's already locked into our system. So taxpayer, ratepayers paying. I just wanted to raise the here. We've got in 2024, implement a national disaster resilience strategy. I presume those sorts of things may shift forward, and they're not exactly climate change issues, are they? This is just other government issues that it's not specifically related to the ERP or anything.
Correct. So some of the actions in there will have elements that relate to national adaptation or climate response. But as you're saying, these things can shift. This is a signal of what we can expect to see. But obviously it spans across 2022 to 2026. And for example, the emissions reduction budget is due to have a new one released in 2025. So we do expect some movement of when these occur. But this is what's been signalled at this stage.
Thank you, Annika. Councillor, I'll just remind you, I don't want to get into arguments about climate change here. We're here to receive this report. But with that said, Councillor Nicol.
No, keep it brief. I continue to extend that if Councillor Hughes wants to have a chat with me, really happy to share some more information on anything, and reiterating my commitment to any councillor on the council that I made yesterday at the start of the Climate Action Committee, that I'm here to work with you to the extent that you would like on both mitigation and adaptation. And on the topic that Ben raised, we're going to send out that link as promised yesterday to Ben about that central government item, and so we'll share that then if that helps.
Thank you.
But actually on that point, I just remembered it would be really good actually because previous submissions of ours, the previous stances of this council have been that we really support for the money to be spent here in New Zealand for progress, as opposed to buying offsets overseas. So that is a stance I'll be looking to councillors in time to see if we want to strengthen that and really urge for that kind of money to be invested here in New Zealand rather than overseas when the bill comes due by 2030. Thank you.
So noted. Thank you, Councillor Nicol. If there are no other questions, we have this report to be received in front of us. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Graf. Seconded. Councillor Dunbar-Smith. Those in favour? All those in favour? Right. Thank you. Opposed? So carried. I would just like to note that Councillor Kneebone indicated he was in favour as well. It's time, I think, to take a 15-minute break. I see two of the boys' bladders are worse than mine, so if we can all come back at 25 past. Thank you. They did. They don't respect the chair.
They don't.